Well, good afternoon and good morning again. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules today to join us for the next installment of the Hickey webinar series. Today, we'll be focusing on European logistics trends across the very dynamic region and really a follow-up and coverage of the exciting report we just released. So again, this is David Hickey with Hickey & Associates Managing Director, and I want to turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Guy Duatol, based in London.
Thank you, David, and good morning, good afternoon to everybody. Today is going to be hopefully an interactive session later on, but a short presentation from myself, but please do post questions as Dave has mentioned, and also we have an opportunity for Q&A via the chat room as you would like. So just to give you a very quick background on Hickey & Associates, we're a 35-year-old company, and we focus on helping our clients find what are the most strategic locations anywhere around the world, answering the question, where in the world, where in a country, where in a city, or where in a specific sub-market. And we do that looking at three areas: labour benchmarking and analytics, which is becoming more and more important with today's labour market, supply chain and logistics, and grants and incentives. So enough about Hickey. Straight going into the report, we're going to look at 5 areas on that. One is to give you a general market background and update on that. Answering where is the workforce that is going to help us with this massive explosion we're seeing in the logistics market. We'll provide some insights and ideas, and particularly around the need to be an employer of choice. And finally, some conclusions which we can enter into discussion about. So to begin with, the market. Well, the market in Europe is predominated by the UK, which is the 3rd largest market globally, with roughly 180 billion in e-commerce sales, and a massive growth of, as you see here, from 2013 to 2018, it's increased by over 100%, and the forecast that will continue to grow. What does that look like across the rest of Europe? So the UK is significantly larger than the rest of Europe, but they are all growing in all the major markets. Some as high as 200 or 300%, as in Romania, Hungary, albeit off a much lower base. Looking at some other statistics within that, the UK, the average spend per household is 6,000 euros, whereas France and Netherlands are about 3,000 euros. France is down about 2,300. So actually, there's a long way for all those markets to catch up, which means that a number of the trends that we're seeing in the UK may well appear in the remainder of European markets. So if you look at the breakdown of where that spend is being made, clothing as an average across Europe is the biggest of the sectors at 38%, software and media just over 30%, household goods just under 30%, and electronics down at about 15%. Other industries do have e-commerce penetration, but at a much lower rate. So how does that look on a country-by-country basis? So if you see the movement on that, you have all the markets to the left on your screen, i.e. major Western European markets, are generally above the European average. The ones to the right of that line are below the European average. The biggest market penetration that we've seen is around clothing and software and media, particularly in the Netherlands and the UK, where you'll see it's over around 50 or 60%. So a significant market share. Then if you look at some of the smaller market shares, but still a significant and definitely increase, you've got household goods and to a lesser extent electronics. And then all the other ones which are shown in the screen in black are sort of between 0 and 25% market penetration. So typically, in the electronics market, where people are still feeling the need to go into the shops to make their purchases. But we see all those things increasing over a period of time. So what has happened in that? Well, the developer response to that is a massive increase in development over the last 2 years. Roughly 15 million square meters was completed across Europe, but with almost 40 million square meters in the pipeline over the next 2 years in response to this increase in demand. What does that look like in terms of the actual logistics industry itself? Well, if you look at here on the left-hand side of the screen, this is the increase in the number of companies in the warehousing and transport sector, which has increased by over 30% for up to nearly 180,000 companies from 136,000 over the last 4 years. And if you look at in terms of employment, that's had a corresponding increase as well over that 4-year period by just over 30%. So everything is great. Developers and occupiers are rising to the challenge of this huge demand for warehousing, and the employment market is growing. But in reality, everything is not quite so rosy, as many who are actively involved in these industries, there are real challenges over where the future workforce will come to feed this massive demand. Particularly, we're seeing an existing challenge in the UK around lorry drivers and warehouse operatives, and that in some of the markets across Europe. So where is the workforce coming from? So almost all countries have increased the employment in the logistics workers. So the grey bar in this will show the number of people employed in the logistics industry, with the orange one showing the increase over the last 5 years. A European average growth has been roughly just under 4% per annum in employment growth, which is about 20% over the last 5 years. But more interesting, if you actually look at the job vacancies as represented here, you'll see the small circle or the grey circles is where we were 2013 in terms of job vacancies. And now the orange circle is representing where we are today. So a massive increase in job vacancies, which is a complete correlation between the additional demand in that sector. Particularly, you've got significant increases in Czechia, Germany, Netherlands, and others. The only one going the other way is in Greece. If you then look at the levels of unemployment, this is not specifically for logistics workers, it's all those workers with less than secondary education, but typically represented in the logistics industry. And we're seeing a decrease in unemployment rates across pretty much every single market. In 2013, the average was around 22% unemployment in less than secondary education, and that has fallen to around 16%. But in many countries, such as the Netherlands and the UK, this is significantly lower at around 6%, but on a local level, this can be as low as 2 or 3% in particular sub-markets. So with such high demand and low unemployment, logistics workers across Europe are demanding higher wages, quite unstandardly. And what we'll see is actually that the logistics workers, compared to the minimum wage, are in most markets paid significantly more than the minimum wage, which is represented by the blue bar, the average wage for the logistics labourers being the grey bar. Not all markets have a minimum wage. But then if you then look at it against the across all workers, which is represented here by the orange bar, and logistics workers is typically below the wages, particularly though the average wage for that. So higher than the minimum wage, but lower than the average wage. But we expect with this increase in demand, this gap to shrink with time. So this labour shortfall will also be further exacerbated by both ageing workforces across most countries and decreasing fertility rates across most of Europe. For example, to maintain a stable population, each country needs to provide 2.1 children for each female. Provide is probably the wrong word, but you know what I mean. And nowhere in Europe has got to the 2.1 level. France being the close at about 1.9, Sweden 1.8, UK, Czech at 1.7. But many of them are much, much lower, down 1.3, such as Spain, Greece, Portugal, and Italy. So not only do you have aging populations with people leaving the workforce, but you also have declining populations, notwithstanding any immigration. Then looking at the migration, we're witnessing net in-migration to most European countries. Those in the orange are represented by the movement of nationals, and the net position will be a balance between those above and below the line. The migration into a country from other EU countries is represented by the blue. So in Germany, it's roughly 600,000. But heavily outweighed by non-EU migrants coming in at 1.2 million. So all these countries, as you will see here, have net in-migration. And significantly, as I was mentioning there, all those outlined in red here, the grey boxes, show that the increase in the number of non-EU workers coming into those countries, typically for Germany, Italy, Spain, and France. From an outward migration, we're still seeing Poland and Romania being net outward migrators, but with the increasing prosperity, particularly in Poland, higher wage levels, and increasing business activity there, we're seeing that that has changed over a number of years, and we see that probably going to fall further. So that was the market in context. So we're seeing many challenges on the availability of labour. But what about the solutions that we're seeing? We've spoken to a number of corporates, 3PLs, employment agencies, to really understand how they're reacting to this challenge. So in a market with such a short labour supply, we're finding that companies can't just pick a location on the traditional way of this is the best place from a supply chain point of view. Obviously, that still needs to be heavily part of the consideration. But if you can't find the labour to go to that particular location, then it's not going to be sustainable. So what we're finding is that these companies are now need to consider the supply of labour and the demand for labour in a particular market, where you might have oversaturation, whereas companies such as Amazon coming in, bringing up 2,000 or 3,000 employees in a very short labour market anyway, is going to have a considerable problem. We're seeing many companies reacting to that and saying that they want to understand which other tenants and occupiers will be in the surrounding area when they're considering that. So not only the availability of labour, but the demand for labour as well. In terms of actual solutions within that, we're seeing that commute times across Europe is typically around 40 minutes. In the UK, that can increase to over 50 minutes. But in reality, most warehouse labourers are much more sensitive to commute times and have a much lower tolerance, and that's probably getting down to around 30 minutes on commute times. And we're really finding that in a short labour market where employees can choose where they go, if they can choose to go somewhere which is 30 minutes rather than 40 minutes and is an easier commute with less methods of transportation involved, then they're going to select that employer and that location is where they want to go. So some of the solutions to come up with this, we're looking at, we've seen used on lift sharing schemes, talking with train and bus operators to start new routes and make changes to existing ones to suit both the pool of labour and the location where they're coming from. Providing shuttle bus services to locations to improve that if you can't get the public transport companies to do it. And the construction of more and improved bike paths for riders and improvement on safety. So really, it can't be overstressed that the labour pool within the 30-minute commute time is becoming more and more important compared to, say, a 40 to 45-minute commute time. So what other solutions are we seeing? Well, as I said, commute times matter. And if you have proximity to low-cost housing which suits warehouse workforce, then that has got to be a bonus. If you look at the UK as an example, the golden triangle of distribution in the East Midlands, a lot of the housing in the East Midlands is higher than the average that a warehouse worker can afford. So having availability close by is certainly going to be an attraction for a particular site. And we're sort of forecasting the move back to the old days, and way before my time, of Port Sunlight, with the Lever brothers building housing next door to production facilities, and the likes of Bourneville with Cadbury's doing the same for that. So proximity to low-cost housing for the workforce is important. We're also expecting to see faster adoption of automation. It has been surprisingly slow, the adoption of automation, and large parts of that is down to the typical cost of and the business case of getting automation into a warehouse, and particularly in a low margin business. But with the shortage of labour coming in and also the pricing for automation falling, we're seeing that business case now being more affordable, either for full or partial automation, and particularly with the use of cobots in some of these fulfillment centres. So with such a tight supply and increasing demand and competition for logistics workers, we're seeing that companies are really having to consider strategies, how they can be an employer of choice in their particular market. And, you know, in terms of that, well, how can you be an employer of choice? Well, we're seeing a range of approaches coming from different companies. But the foremost is that we're seeing that logistics workers are now demanding parity with their office counterparts. I'm not just talking about the office counterparts within the logistics warehouse, but those that typically would be in the headquarter type location. They're demanding additional amenities in there, which could be better access to higher quality food. We're seeing the provision of indoor and outdoor gyms and recreational areas, such as running tracks and football pitches. And in some markets and in slightly nicer climates, you know, barbecue pits and in coffee bars. A lot of different things coming in. Also, the provision of childcare facilities being considered, particularly on the large logistics parks. And then in terms of the actual physical specification of buildings, we're seeing the increase of natural light in buildings. And one of the anecdotes I heard from, whether it's true or not, was in John Lewis, which is the UK partnership, where the employees are partners. They were asked whether they would approve a mezzanine floor in a warehouse, and they turned it down, and so they didn't do it because of that would cut out some of the natural light to that. We're also seeing potentially bringing in heated warehouse back into one of the amenities that is being considered in warehousing. Um, Typically, this was pushed out 20 to 30 years ago. Another study that we did showed one particular retail company, two identical warehouses of the same size, roughly 750,000 square feet, over 70,000 square meters. They were paying the same wages and the same benefits to their employees and had the same amenities in the building. But in one building, they had almost no unemployment and an attrition rate or turnover of staff of 2 or 3%, which is natural turnover as people retire or move away. Whereas the warehouse directly opposite that they ran, again with the same wages, benefits, and amenities, they had over 30% unemployment on an analysed basis and a turnover of staff of 40 to 45%. So what is the reason between that? Well, one was a clothing warehouse with relatively light picking and packing in the warehouse, whereas the warehouse opposite was heavy groceries. It was still an ambient warehouse, but could get very cold in the winter, very hot during the summer, and was much heavier work. And effectively, what was happening is employees were voting with their feet and going to the better working environment and the easier work for the same wages. So what other solutions are we seeing? We're seeing the use now of employment apps. This is sort of back to the future type thing, whereas in the old days of clocking in and clocking out, you can now do that on the phone via an app. You could say, well, that's nothing new, nothing particularly amazing about that. But what we're seeing is trialing of this method. Whereas if at the end of the day your manager says that you've done the work satisfactorily, you get paid immediately into your bank account, which becomes very attractive to some of the lower paid workers in the logistics environment. And again, can make you an employer of choice, particularly with some of the migrant workers. We're also seeing some companies considering family contracts where a husband and wife or partners can agree to fulfill a certain amount of hours, 40 to 60 hours in a week, and it doesn't matter which one of them actually fulfills those hours. That could be extended into the wider family, not the young children as you'll see in the picture there, but in terms of working age children who might be coming back from university for the summer to fill or need to earn some money over Christmas, that they then could be part of that family contract. But not only does it provide flexibility to the employer, particularly around shift times and some of the seasonal work, actually able to turn the workforce on and off for those periods, it becomes very attractive to families who want flexibility on who can fulfill the hours, which will allow you to either do some part-time work elsewhere or to deal with childcare facility as well. One of the other things we're seeing is around shift patterns and seasonality. So on the shift patterns, we've worked with companies who have asked us to look at what are the shift patterns that competing occupiers are offering in the surrounding area to the warehouse that they're operating in, and then seeking out to see what is the most attractive to employees in that area, and if they're able to offer more attractive shift patterns than their competitors for the same jobs. Around seasonality of demand, some of the considerations we're talking to with some of the developers we're working with is around where you have the luxury of two or three people chasing the same building. If you can choose an occupier who may have a different shift pattern or seasonality of work than the majority of your occupiers on the estate, so you could be providing, it could be Easter eggs, which is a very seasonal piece, or it could be uh, water, bottles of water, which will be used much more in the summer, which could then be mixed with somebody who would have a peak around Christmas time. So again, it's thinking about these things, particularly when you have the shortage of labour and balancing them out. Some of the other areas that we're seeing is around employers going into the local schools and colleges and trying to show that working in the logistics industry is attractive. Typically, there isn't any particular career path to go into logistics, and very little promotion alongside that. So going in, talking to the children and their parents to make them understand, one, you could get paid well above the minimum wages. Two, you could be working for a very large retailer or third-party logistics company where you could have a career path. I noticed an advert the other day in the papers from Amazon offering, I think it was 6,000 euros for their employees to go into a training program after they completed 1 year with them. And that could be training to do a completely different role outside the logistics environment in the warehouse. So trying to make an attractive proposition that you have a career path, you have benefits and amenities available to the employees, something that would never have been considered before. To support that, we look at some of the incentives that are available for training. That could be specifically for hiring new people or training people within the industry. But also for capital investment to go into new warehouses. If labour is in short supply, how do you make the business case for automation? Is there any incentives available for those employees? Sorry, for the employers. So really, in conclusion from all that, there were three key areas I really would like to highlight. Firstly, that e-commerce is requiring more warehousing and creating a significant shortage of labour, and with the expectation that the rise in e-commerce will increase right across Europe and may beat or match the European percentages, then I would expect that the issues that we're having in the UK to be coming up. Sorry, very. Okay. Secondly, that location and commuting times matter. It's becoming more and more important. One can't just consider that because you're on the crossroads of two motorways or auto routes, that is the only metric that you should look at. Increasingly, the availability of labour and the ease of commuting for your pool of labour to get to that is hugely important. And lastly, how can you be creative and to be an employer of choice, and particularly tight markets? And I'm sure all those involved in the industry can think of particular sub-markets where it's a real issue. I was talking to a client the other day who needed to employ 2,500 people in a labour pool of 55,000 with an unemployment rate of 3%. They absolutely had to be in that location, so they were looking to see how they could be creative in being an employer of choice in that particular market. So that ends the formal presentation. Thank you for listening, and I am sure there will be a few questions. So please fire away, David. I think you're going to run the Q&A.
Thank you, Guy. Incredibly informative and enlightening presentation. And I can encourage everyone to utilize the chat feature as we'll open it up now for question and answers. So I know the first question that came in from the crowd, we went 35 minutes without getting into detail, but of course that pending Brexit question. And the question from the audience is, how will Brexit affect the labor market? Good luck.
Yeah, so I've just given my coin out, so I'm just going to toss it to see which way it goes. So I think, I mean, Brexit specifically, if we look at it from the impact in the UK rather than any impact on mainland Europe, well, at the moment, I mean, the key issues is around the complete uncertainty and the need for stockpiling of certain goods during that period of uncertainty, and that currently is coinciding with the typical seasonal demand for warehousing to satisfy the periods around Black Friday and Christmas. So that's having an immediate impact on that. In terms of the future, I think the UK is one of the most popular destinations for immigration. It also has London and the southeast particularly has the largest sort of market in itself, and so what we're seeing from that point of view is that whilst there may be some damage from Brexit, so long as we don't completely mess up on taxation, education, immigration policies, that there is expectation that we'll have a short to medium term bump in the road. But if we can satisfy those three things, things should smooth out, and the demand will still remain, and the UK should hopefully hold its own.
Okay, thank you. Another question came back to the partnership side. So how can I'll rephrase this. So how can you leverage in companies and developers leverage partnerships with local enterprise partnerships, local councils, national government to help with the labor issues and the labor challenges going forward?
I think that it's quite a simple one, which is go and have a conversation, ask them. We're delightfully surprised the amount of times when you might research in and you don't think that there are local incentives available. Some can be openly through the central government or through the EU, and we can help navigate through those. But what we're finding also with the right approach to the local enterprise and the local governments, making them understand that you may be bringing jobs to the area, but actually increasingly we're seeing money being released for retaining jobs in an area. So it's really about having the right approach and asking the question, this is our issue, can you help us? We need help with the business case financially to make this, particularly where you may be a international company or even a national company with different options that you can consider. So it's not a gun to the head, but it's a reasoned approach with those companies, with the local partnerships, I should say. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. So another question that came in is on the training side, and I know we touched on it a little bit during your presentation, but the question, what are logistics companies doing to help train their employees and or educating parents on logistics as a career?
So this is kind of relatively new. I've spoken to both 3PLs and retailers who on a very localized basis are going into the local schools and colleges and talking to the children in those at a relatively sort of 2 or 3 year horizon, to set out that what happens in a warehouse. It's not all about heavy lifting. There is an automation in there. There are attractive jobs available to them. As I said before, the wages could be attractive to that. It's not all about minimum wages. It's about above minimum wages. And if you work in some of the managerial automation parts of the warehouse, and they can be substantially more than that. And as I said, it's not just persuading the children; it's also the bias from the parents, who may feel that working in a warehouse is an unattractive proposition. I would argue that actually, if you see the failure in many high streets now, or the retailers having struggling there, that it actually will provide an alternate career for those type of people to look at within a fashion retailer or some other such company. And you could start in the warehouse and end up running the company.
That's very good. Thank you. So another question, and we do an entire webinar on just this alone. But what are the key criteria? So how do occupiers pick a location to base their operations? What criteria do they use?
So they use multiple criteria. As I said, obviously you need to take into supply chain point of view. Where is the best way of goods coming in and goods coming out? We've got not only sort of national delivery, but also last mile delivery. It's hugely important. And that, so on that last mile piece, a lot of what we're doing now with our clients is looking at not only where are the pool of labor to serve within the warehouse, but also what is the pool of potential customers that you would service. How many households could you service, or office workers, because parcels to be delivered to both. So balancing those two pieces out. But a lot of it comes back to people, so it's not just about lorry movements. That is hugely important, and the cost of that. But it's about servicing that, whether within the warehouse through the local transportation network. Could be if in Berlin you need to get goods from your warehouse to your parcel delivered, that could be through a number of different ways, whether it be bicycles, scooters, electric vehicles, and looking at the transportation network on that. Hopefully that answers that question.
Yes, thank you. And so what if I want to dig further into this data?
If you want to dig further, then please give me a call, send me an email, and I can help explore that further with you. Very happy to do so.
I don't see any further questions from the panelists, from the attendees. So Guy, thank you very much. And most importantly, thank you all for taking the time today for this installment of the Hickey webinar series. We really focused and discussed European logistics trends and the dynamic market that certainly is today and well into tomorrow, and a number of those key aspects and criteria that developers, landlords, as well as companies are looking at every day. Before I close out, Guy, any final thoughts for the attendees?
Well, if everybody has a clearer guidance on where Brexit's going to go, then please let me know. But no, thank you very much, David.
All right, thank you, Guy. Thank you, everyone, again. Take care.